Hi, my name is John Baumgart. I wanted to make a video today that addresses the state of mental health of our current president, Joe Biden. And by the way, you're a lying dog-faced pony soldier. Okay, this is a more politically charged video, obviously, but I wanted to at least provide my thoughts because I think it's a subject that simply isn't being addressed by most of the media. To me, it appears alarming if you take the same rhetoric the media used not so long ago. But before I get into those points, and I have a few, I want to just focus on the main topic. So whenever the subject of Joe Biden's mental health comes up, you'll hear a variety of counter arguments such as you're taking video clips out of context, he used to have a stutter, well, he's not Trump, Trump really said the crazy things, or are you a doctor, do you understand mental health, how can you make this diagnosis, etc. I find most of these arguments to be quite weak. I'm going to address all of them. And I'll start off by saying, look, if this was nitpicking, if this was one or two slip-ups, yes, I think that would be exaggerated. And I do think that in the election of 2020, the Republicans overplayed their hand, that they said the debates were going to be a disaster. I'm not sure exactly what Biden did or had during the debates, but I would say he did okay. He slipped up very little. But now that that pressure is off, that the spotlight is off of him, and there's a lot more cover to run under, it seems very clear that he's going through some mental decline. So I will address those points. But first, I think the most obvious way to prove this is just to look at Joe Biden's, let's say, speech, his talk, his cadence, his tone of voice, not so long ago, and compare it to now.
Finest warriors in the history of the world. The finest warriors in the history of the world.
The first step is reverse President Trump's tax cut for the very wealthy and corporations. We need to eliminate these special tax breaks from the tax code that reward special interests.
Where there's a willingness to directly confront prejudice, bigotry, homophobia, there's the ability to succeed. Because I believe after all these years, at their base, at their root, the American people want to do the right thing. Most of them till now have been afraid.
That's underway, just like the other question that's illogical. And I've heard you speak about it because I'm not being solicitous, but you're always straight up about what you're doing. And the question is whether or not we should be in a position where you are, why can't the experts say, we know that this virus is in fact, it's going to be, or excuse me, we know why all the drugs approved are not temporarily approved, but permanently approved. Yeah. That's underway too. I expect that to occur quickly.
Well, that means, you mean for the FDA?
For the FDA.
Yeah.
You got the vaccination?
Yeah.
Are you okay? I mean, you seem, no, it works. Or or the mom and dad, or the neighbor, or when you go to church, or when you're, no, I really mean it. There are trusted interlocutors. Think of the people, if your kid wanted to find out whether or not there's a man on the moon, or whatever, something, or, whether those aliens are here or not, who are the people they talk to beyond the kids who love talking about it?
So, it should be clear just looking at that something is different. And I'll address the mental health point first. People say, well, you're not a mental health expert. I mean, you don't have to be. That's the thing. If you see that it's raining outside, you don't need to have a peer-reviewed study by a group of scientists to know that you need an umbrella or a raincoat. I mean, it's the same way here. If someone cannot remember basic things, if they are constantly getting lost in making an explanation, and if they just appear to have a lack of energy, I mean, it's obvious that something is up. And I think everyone is kind of looking the other way in the media. I'll get to that, but I think it's a sad state of affairs. And the fact that people are just trying to cover this up, I think says a lot about the state of politics in our society, about media and other things. But just look at some of the clips. And at the end of this video, I will put together what I think are the most flagrant offenses. And you be the judge. You tell me if I'm picking things out of context when it's only 6 months into his presidency and there's already so many examples of him fumbling, And in terms of the stutter, yes, he occasionally does stutter words, but once again, go back to that video clip I provided. He was fine. I mean, most of his political career, you can find that, yeah, he says some things and he messes up. Not like this. It's completely different. I mean, he's not forgetting things. He's not losing his pace as to where he is. Something is up. You don't need to be a doctor. This is clear as day. And you be the judge. Look at all my clips at the end and you tell me. So, anyways, I think it's clear beyond a doubt, and what I find very interesting about the state of media, politics, our culture, is how the tables have turned so much. And that's going to be the first point I'm going to bring up about this whole thing. So, if you remember, and it wasn't so long ago when we had Donald Trump as president, and I kind of always have to say this, I don't feel like I should defend myself, but anyway, I didn't vote for him, I'm not a supporter, but I will come to a defense of the president when I find that there's a contradiction as flagrant as this one. And so let's remember what a lot of the rhetoric was during the presidency of Donald Trump. Number one, he's too old. Okay, so now that's not talked about. I mean, I cannot find many New York Times articles, Washington Post articles, CNN articles, any of these questioning Joe Biden's age and mentioning how they may see a threat to the country or danger or something. But that was basically one of the constant, kind of news cycles or topics or subjects that came up during the Trump presidency. He's too old. This president is too old. I mean, the age difference, I believe, is 2 years, with Joe Biden being slightly older. You don't hear about that. That is not mentioned anymore. But that was the main attack against Donald Trump. Number two is, he's not mentally there. This was Donald Trump. He's crazy. He's off the wire. He's off the hook. Now here, I do agree, and I'll get into how I think the media should have reacted to the Trump presidency. I'm not going to deny that Trump said and tweeted many crazy things. But I can find now many crazy things that Joe Biden is saying that don't make sense. Now, the difference is, I think, in the case of Trump, they were intentioned, and that is more dangerous. And it was unclear if he was going to act on these things. For Joe Biden, I just think stumbles in his words, gets lost. But that is also a sense of danger. I mean, I'll use the same arguments. Do you want the nuclear codes and all of this power to be held by someone who, it appears at times, doesn't know where he is? I mean, he's on multiple occasions during the presidential run, he stated he was in the wrong place. I mean, that's an undisputable fact. But even now, he forgets things like, who his former, Obama, the president was that he served under. He called Donald Trump Donald Hump one time. I mean, there's so many examples. So I think that's a fair question to ask. But once again, I don't see any media outlets mentioning this. That is it dangerous that, this guy is fumbling a lot of times in his speech, can barely stick to the teleprompter. Does that make for a healthy country? And then, I mean, it's very funny that he's also embroiled in this Ukraine scandal. But I don't want this video to be that, and I don't want to derail it. But it is funny that he's also involved in that. But there's no impeachment. I mean, no one is calling for the impeachment of Joe Biden. I'll leave it at that. That'll be another video. But the whole point is, the attacks that the media used against Trump, you can apply to Joe Biden. That's the point I'm trying to make. But the same media who a couple of years ago said these things are now very eerily silent on the same claims. So what is it? And this leads to my next point, that we have a lot of distrust in our society. And when people ask, why don't you trust the media? You can find polls that say that media trust is very low. Why don't you trust the government? Why is mistrust so high? Why are we politically polarized? I think a lot of that can be sourced and can be traced at the media and the role they're playing. So that's what I'd like to get into next. So I find the media is very much at fault for a lot of the distrust, a lot of the division, a lot of the problems we have in our country. And it's interesting. There's two things from my past that were interesting that I don't think apply today. The first is about politicians. Now, when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, politicians were held to a much higher standard. When I was very little, there was a guy named Dan Quayle who misspelled the word potato on a chalkboard. And this became a media story for a long time. So much that I still remember it, even though it was 1988. I was very young at the time. And now, I'd say that all ended with Trump. That, once again, is another story, but there is just no standard anymore about any of this. But misspelling a word on a chalkboard was enough to derail an entire presidential campaign. Go back a little bit more to when I was a student. There was, on the Democratic side, a guy named Howard Dean. And this one I still don't understand. But basically, he got very excited in his speech, and he was pumped up. And I can't remember it verbatim, but he said something to the effect of, we're going to go to Cincinnati, and then we're going to go to Los Angeles, and then we're going to go here. Yeah! And that was it. To me, he just sounded like he was excited because he saw a lot of momentum in his campaign. But for some reason, the media made this out to be like it was some grave offense, and his candidacy died there. He did not become the Democratic candidate at the time. I believe it was up against Bush in 2000. I could be wrong about this because I'm just thinking off the top of my head. But that used to be the standard. Now I think there's no standard. I do blame Trump for this. This is where I think he completely shattered that. But I also blame the media, and I'll get into why I blame them. They're both at fault for reacting to Trump. But now there's no standard. So that's one thing that's changed. Now, anything goes. And I think that's why you can have someone like Joe Biden as president. If spelling potato wrong disqualified you, or being a little excited did, in the 2000s, it's amazing he even got this far. Only in this crazy time we live in could that have happened. That's number one. Number two is there was a time, and that's how I was raised, that reading the news meant you were informed. That meant to be an informed citizen, to be a model citizen who could make an educated choice on who they decided to elect to office. One should follow the news and be informed. That's not the case anymore, on at least mainstream outlets. And I'm not biased here. It's the same. Fox News did plenty of cover. Basically they ran cover all the time for Trump, while CNN and Washington Post, all those others attacked him. You can't get a straight answer anymore from the mainstream outlets on either side of the political aisle. So what's being informed? Because in my opinion, on this subject, which, I can't think of a more important one, the mental state of the president. We call him the leader of the free world and all these other names. I think it's a bit exaggerated if you understand the U.S. government, although now with executive orders, I'd say the president has more power in the past. But anyway, let's say he's a leader of the free world. Shouldn't there be a daily kind of discussion about this? Shouldn't there be some topic? But there's an entire media apparatus, not just news channels. It's online, it's newspapers that are just quiet. They're not talking about this at all. There's a very good article by Matt Taibbi, who is a journalist who I actually think does objective, actual journalism. He actually asks tough questions. And his whole premise in the article is that it's starting to look a lot like the Soviet Union, where you're just looking the other way. You can never report anything bad about the Joe Biden presidency. There's nothing. There is absolutely nothing that he's being questioned on. He doesn't get asked very tough questions, occasionally, but nothing like Trump. But no one is talking about this. And so I throw it back and say, if the whole idea of following the news is to be informed, then what are you being informed about? If you cannot get a straight answer on this from most media channels, they're going to talk about it on Fox News. But, for someone like me, I don't want to mention here my political views. They've changed a lot, but I don't want to have to listen to Fox News to hear a Joe Biden slip up. Why should I have to go there? Or to some independent podcast? I should be able to get it from the main news stations, but they won't report it on it anymore. So what does that say? And if you look at this, now connect this to other things. See, to me, and I'm a very rational person, if I see that these channels are running cover for Joe Biden, well, what else are they running cover for? I think that is a very fair question to ask. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I mean, you could perhaps argue that I am. I'd like to see proof if you look at my videos. But there are a lot of people who believe in conspiracies. And this is fueling it, okay? If you wonder why we have so much distrust, why people don't trust the government, they don't trust leaders, they don't trust the media, they don't want to follow everything related to COVID, start with the media. They're not being honest with people. And so, of course, people are going to just assume everything they say is propaganda. Now, I won't go that far, but I think a lot of it is now, and this is my best case in point. I mean, if it's not propaganda, then how come we can't have these discussions? Why is it there cannot be a serious talk on CNN, an op-ed piece in Washington Post discussing this specific topic? I mean, is it not important? And then it leads to the next thing, which I also think is fair to ask, and any good journalist should ask. If this is the mental state of Joe Biden, then who is running the country? If he can barely make it through 15 minutes without flubbing up, what capacity does he have to make any decisions? And so then, who is it then that are making these decisions for him? Who are the ones running the country? And we'll see. Like I said, it's only 6 months in and it looks like this. And I'm not a negative doomsday type of person. I'm just saying it's not going to get better. And what's it going to be? Are we going to have Kamala Harris for president soon? I mean, I would be shocked if Joe Biden finishes this term. I'm not going to say that he will die in office, but I'll be shocked if he can effectively run this presidency. That as each year passes, I think he's going to be pushed more and more into the background. You're going to see less and less. I mean, that was his campaign strategy, and I think it was a good one. But now he's the president, and if you notice, he makes speeches, he does things, it's very limited. And the more exposure he gets, the more obvious this becomes. And I think these are all fair questions to ask, but they're simply not being addressed. And this can be sourced to the division and the problems we have in our country. So now to wrap up with my final thoughts, I mean, this is one of many examples of what I think is just a breakdown in trust in our mainstream media. And like I mentioned, I'm not a fan of either outlet. I don't like to listen to them. Although sometimes if you listen to Fox News, you'll at least get, some more honest reporting on this aspect of Joe Biden. It's not covered at all by the other outlets. But I don't like these channels. I like to listen basically to independent podcasts. But even there, I mean, I like to openly admit that I listen to Daily Wire to at least get some kind of conservative outlook that's not crazy about the state of the world. I listen to other podcasts as well. Fifth Column, I will do another video on that. I think is an excellent centrist podcast. I mean, I don't like these political labels, but I'd find that they are very much center left, we'll say, but have a very rational approach. I really enjoy this podcast a lot. I would suggest listening to it. There are others, but I don't pay attention anymore to any mainstream news or any of that because I know, for the reasons I mentioned, you're not being given honest, truthful answers. And I think this is now going to be the future of communication. I think TV channel media and newspapers are slowly dying. I mean, now because of the way that newspapers can make their money, they're basically preaching to their audience. And that means if you read the New York Times, the Washington Post, you're just not going to get direct answers on domestic policy. Now, I believe it was in the Fifth Column they mentioned that as long as the subject doesn't touch America, that the reporting is actually decent. So I think New York Times reporting on, let's say, Gambia or South Africa or perhaps Latin America, depending on where, of course, but as long as it doesn't touch any kind of social justice items, can be fairly good because there's no agenda. I mean, there's not much they can say about Gambia that really can fit into some agenda that can go back to the U.S. Cuba, no, but in terms of Latin America, South America. So there, I think the well-known outlets are okay on international. But if you want to get into domestic things, I just ignore it. I listen to podcasts, and there are on Substack some independent authors who I think are very good. Glenn Greenwald, I highly recommend. I mentioned Matt Taibbi. I think he's excellent. I also like Barry Weiss. And I think this is going to be the future, that people are just going to have to find a few journalists or other stations that they prefer to listen to, or podcasts that they subscribe. And that's where people are going to get their information. And slowly these channels are going to lose their influence. But it'll take time. But I think even since Trump, CNN ratings are down. I don't even care. It makes sense to me that he was the big moneymaker, and Joe Biden just isn't exciting. And as much as they want to report on this stuff, they can't, for the reasons I mentioned. There would be a lot of backlash. So I'll put links in the description to what I think are very objective news sources. I mean, we have to understand, news always has some bias, but you can at least get very good information from these sources. So check it out. And if you liked this video, then let me know in the comments. If you wanted me to make another topic, I will. And I have this fancy plaque here, so make sure to subscribe to my channel if you liked it. I'm happy to make more videos. If you disagree with me, if you think I'm wrong, then make a rebuttal video. I'm all for free speech, for people's opinions. I like to have discussions. And so before this video ends, you'll now see my compilation, what I think are the most flagrant Joe Biden gaffes. So enjoy.
And meet this climate crisis, exacerbating the need for environmental justice. Sorry, as a bug. Speaking of the environment. We need to work again with Canada and Mexico as neighbors, not as adversaries. Donald Trump does pose an extra threat to this. It's not hypothetical. There's things that are worth dealing with China tough on. That makes it far more durable, reliable, and powerful. And partnerships built on coercion.
Because if you could take care, if you were a quartermaster, you can sure and hell take care of running a department store thing, where in the second floor of the ladies' department or whatever. You know what I mean?
And what makes his wild claims and hopes, he now hopes we don't notice what he said or won't remember. And when he does follow through or doesn't do, would follow through the exact opposite. 1.2 billion. So you go ahead and you stack spaghetti sauce at a store and in a supermarket. You control the guy or the woman who brings out the carts on a forklift. What happened? The way China will respond is when we gather the rest of the world that in fact believes in open trade, and making sure that we're in a position that the world that we deal with WHO the right way. That in fact that's when things began to change. I looked at it anyway. That's what I think my plan. I know what my plan does. I mean. No, but I mean, it's not about, I know some people are waiting for relief. I got them $1.9 trillion relief so far. They're going to be getting checks in the mail that are consequential this week for childcare. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by COVID has taken this year, just since the outbreak, it's taken more than 100 years. Look, here's the lives. When you think about it. The rapidly rising I don't know. I just spoke at Dartmouth on healthcare at the medical school, or not. I guess I wasn't actually on the campus, but the people from the medical school were at the. I want to be clear. I'm not going nuts. I'm not sure whether it was a medical school or where the hell I spoke, but it was on the campus. I propose, and I'm going to digress slightly. We're in a situation. The president asked me to head up a cancer moonshot. Another country and annex a significant portion of it called Crimea. Right. He's saying that it was my boss, it was his fault. Guatemala, El Salvador, and to go in and say in Honduras and say, look, I took on Putin in terms of in terms of what was going on in Ukraine. By strengthening, by investing $100 billion in education, in global warming efforts. It's a whole range of things. We can't afford it by just eliminating, beginning to treat work, reward work. What kind of country we're going to be? 4 more years of Georgia, is going to find ourselves in a position where if Trump gets elected,